following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and we are Lovin' Baseball when we were 12 years old and innocent. I'm Ralph Tycho of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and my guest is William Bruton. William, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, good. I want you to know that when I was 12, one of my heroes was Billy Bruton, your dad. Oh, it's your grandfather. Okay. Did I speak with your dad? Your dad back when we started?
Yeah, you spoke to my dad. Well, you spoke to both of us, but yeah, you spoke to my dad initially.
Okay, so now I know what I'm doing. Let me tell you something. It's confusing with the COVID, and the whole world is changing. But I'm going to try to put my thoughts in order and tell you that when I was 11, my New York Giants moved to San Francisco. And it kind of broke my heart in a way, and in a big way. I was a National League fan as well as a Giant fan, and in 1957 in the World Series, as a little kid, I rooted for the Milwaukee Braves. For a number of reasons. First of all, I loved Henry Aaron. He was the superstar of the day. He wasn't Willie, but I was a kid, and I was so mad at the Giants for a while. And, I kind of disowned them and had the privilege in 1958 of rooting for what I consider to be as good a team as I've ever followed in baseball. I'm 73, 74 now. And I was 12 in 1958, and I just want to tell you the center fielder was solid. Billy Bruton, your grandfather. Yeah. Let me ask you, what are your memories of him, and if not him, if he wasn't around when you were growing up, and I think that was the case, if I'm not mistaken, what was told to you about your dad?
Well, I remember him well. He was around when I was young. He actually died when I was turning 12. So ironic you chose that age. But
that was ironic. I'm so sorry for your loss. I can only imagine. I lost my grandfather, so I know what you went through.
Yeah, it was a heavy loss. But we actually did play baseball with him when I was younger. I actually played baseball with my first cousins and my brothers in the Boy Scouts, and he came and watched us play, and a couple of times he played with us. You know, he liked playing with kids, so he was actually known when he moved to Detroit for playing baseball with the neighborhood kids at the neighborhood park, you know.
Right. Speaking of Detroit, he was traded to the Tigers for one of the Bowling brothers. I can't remember if it was Milt Bowling or he was a second baseman. They hoped, the Braves did, to fill a void with Rich Shanding's retiring and what have you. And he spent the rest of his career in Detroit. And when he was done playing, he went to work for Chrysler Corporation. And I don't know what he was in some sort of management position with Chrysler. And he really did well for himself, a nice retirement. And he was able to stay in the town that he played ball in, Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Braves did he tell you? Anything that he told you about those early Brave years that I was talking about, 57 and 58? What did he tell you that stood out? What made them so great in his mind?
I think that he was just allowed to play the game. He was just allowed to play. He just wanted to play, is the way they said it. It wasn't about breaking barriers and things for them. They just loved the game of baseball. His father was actually a really good baseball player, and that's who taught him how to play. So him and his father and his brothers played. And with the Braves, those first, I think, 2, maybe 3 years, he was leading in stolen bases. And then the management changed, and that management changed, and they didn't want, it was about just playing the game. Don't worry about the stealing and things like that. So they cut back on just do what you do, and it was play how we want you to play,
Right. They were really into power for a while there. I mean, they were getting guys like Mac Jones, I think, was one of them, and Philippe Alou came from the Giants and played with the Braves. Not just about baseball. Give me a lesson that he taught you about life.
About life. Persistence, stay, and faithfulness. He was a fan of always staying persistent and faithful. If you pick up something, you start something, you always finish it, see it through. He didn't like quitters.
Okay.
He didn't like quitters.
Okay. I want you to know, let's run down some of the team that he played with. First of all, you had 3 Hall of Famers in the aforementioned Henry Aaron, Warren Spahn, and Eddie Matthews.
Mm-hmm.
Did he talk about, speaking of consistency, Eddie Matthews or Warren Spahn was that? Did he talk about playing behind Warren Spahn at all?
No, he didn't. He talked more about Hank, mainly because they were close friends, and after they retired, they owned a couple of businesses and things together. My father actually grew up calling him Uncle Hank, so I knew more about Hank and Wes Covington than anyone else.
Covington was the third outfielder in only the second time 3 blacks played in the outfield at the same time. Mm-hmm. To the best of my knowledge, I can tell you the first time. It was in the 1951 World Series when I guess it was the playoffs, that final game when Bobby Thompson hit the home run. Mm-hmm. And Don Mueller slid into third base beforehand, had to be taken out, missed the World Series, and they moved Hank Thompson from third to right. And he, Monty Irvin, and Willie Mays were the first 3 blacks to play, certainly in the World Series. And now, if I'm not mistaken,
he talked about Mays as well. Yeah.
But your dad, Henry Aaron, and Wes Covington played as starting outfielders, and doesn't seem like much today. I mean, but back then, wow, 3 blacks in the same outfield.
Yeah, it was a big deal. Yeah.
It was a big deal. And I'm curious because Wisconsin is the Midwest. How did Wisconsin handle interracial people getting together interracially to play ball? That's a well-worded question. I ought to be a podcaster. You got to give me a break.
No, you're doing good. You're doing fine.
All right. What was it like racially in Wisconsin for the Braves?
There were the ups and the downs. He had fans, and so the fans were not an issue, but there were some that were just not ready for that integration. And so he was harassed by the phone. Sometimes people would come by the house. I did go and see the house that they first purchased and the house my dad and them were born in. And I know one of the things that a lot of the public may not know is there was a couple of pictures of him that he autographed, and they just kind of had it photocopied because my grandmother was scared. People would just come knock on the door looking for him, and she couldn't tell if they were just fans wanting to say hi or if it was someone meaning, to do something, some harm, because they did get a lot of threats at the house. So he signed a lot of those pictures and then, photocopied them so that they would have something to give away as people would come to the house.
Oh, okay. Kind of to offset anything that may come up, and made it easy for your grandmother, I'm sure, to recognize, who would respond and who would. Was your dad happy? Was your grandfather happier in Detroit than he was in Milwaukee?
I think he was happier in Milwaukee as far as playing. But I think as far as life, he was a little happier in Detroit. There was a lot of family there outside of him. And he knew that when he retired, he was going to have a second career. He started setting up the job with Chrysler, before he retired. And so that was an easy way for him to get in the door.
Okay. That, like we talked about, I think it was off air a little bit. He had a tremendous career with Chrysler, and that was nice to see because, again, that team remains deep in my heart. Let's go over some of the players. First base, Joe Adcock platooned with Frank Torrey, who was Joe Torrey's older brother, and really a good defensive first baseman. And that combination of Adcock and at first base with Frank Torrey was tremendous. They had Red Shindings playing second base, former future Hall of Famer, former Giant, former Cardinal. Johnny Logan was a solid shortstop. I mentioned Eddie Matthews, of course, a Hall of Famer at third.
Now Logan was one of the stories that did get passed down was how, before and after the games when the team would eat, Logan was one of the people that would have the team wait. Okay, everybody wait. We got to wait for Bruton to say grace over the food.
Whoa. Didn't realize that. Didn't know that. And Logan was a hard-nosed former New Yorker, if I'm not mistaken. And I could be mistaken on that, but he was known as a hard-nosed, rough ball player. And the team itself, there were fellows that Don Buell was one. Eddie Matthews was another one. These were some hard-playing post-war guys that really. And I remember one thing. There was in 1958. I was a big proponent of the sporting news. I couldn't wait for it to come. And one time, the Braves were in L.A., and there was a famous story that was written up in the sporting news, and I happened to have that sporting news somewhere in my files. I kept it. There was a big party in LA, and I don't know if your dad ever mentioned that. I don't know if he was involved in that, but I remember Torrey, Buell, and Matthews were partiers, and there was a famous Hollywood party which those guys were involved in, and but I wanted to mention Bill Crandall too. He was the only one of the 1958 Braves that I ever got to meet in person. I was the Topps rep. Gave out the $5 checks in the Northwest League on the West Coast and the California League in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, wow.
And great job for a baseball fanatic like myself.
Yeah.
I can't believe I've got a lot of stories about those days. But my point was that, and I don't really remember what my point was, but Bill Crandall was a roving instructor, catching instructor with the Dodgers. One second.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. And Bill Crandall told me how to pronounce Harry Hannebrink's name. It was either Hannebrink or Hannebrink. Either way, I pronounced it wrong all my life, and he corrected me. Do you happen to remember if it was Hannebrink or Hannebrink?
No, I didn't talk much about him.
All right, he was a utility infielder, and that was my interaction with Bill Crandall, who in those days, Campanella had been severely injured in a crash between 1957, the 57 season, and the 58 season. And Bill Crandall assumed the spot as the National League's all-star catcher, starting all-star catcher. And he was known to be the best catching instructor in baseball. So I still get goosebumps. I was 40 when I met him. And I still, because he represented, like I say, one of the best teams. And there was a kid, Don McMahon's son was a minor leaguer at the time, and I got to meet him. And Don McMahon was the relief pitcher of that team, and he was very, very solid. And all told, with Buell starting and Spahn and Bob Rush, they were a deep, tremendous team. So, I mean, that's a legacy. I would say that the 58 Braves were as good, like I told you, as good as any team I ever watched in terms of being solid, great pitching. Juan Pizarro, speaking of pitching, was a pitcher on that team, and he passed away this past week. So, rest in peace, Juan Pizarro. You know, time goes, and anyway, I want to know what you got into in life. What was your avocation? What is your avocation?
I help in real estate. My mom is a real estate broker. We do real estate together. And I also work in genealogy and ancestry. So I actually became the kind of historian in our family, trying to piece our heritage together. And needed my grandfather's help with that. So that's one of the other reasons why my dad kind of said, well, maybe you should do the interview just in case they start asking other questions that we don't know.
Okay. Tell me about your dad.
My dad was born in Milwaukee. He was actually born in '56, and of course, they grew up in Detroit when my grandfather was traded, and I was born in Detroit, so most of the family stayed there until about the '90s, and then we slowly started moving away. But my dad was also very active in sports. Basketball was his sport, which, my grandfather, of course, didn't like. He wanted him to be a baseball. It ran in the family,
Right.
And he was going to play with the Detroit Pistons, but he got injured his knee, and so he wasn't able to sign.
Whoa.
So later my dad went into computers and computer networking and things. And he actually just retired last year.
Oh, your dad retired. Billy Bruton's son retired. Now that makes me feel a little on the old side. But that's all right. That's all right. I'd rather be old than the alternative.
That's all right. And hey, getting old means you're wiser. You've lived and got a long story and experience to share as well. So
I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to pick up new experiences. I'm trying to interview people who weren't necessarily 12 when I was 12, like your dear old self, William Bruton.
Right.
All right. So what you've lived life after me, and you were familiar with baseball. What's changed in baseball for the better? We always talking about, things when I was a kid or when these guys played, it was this, that, and the other thing. And baseball of today gets a bad rap. What is it about baseball that turns you on today? In other words, what was I deprived in your mind of seeing when I grew up that you get to see now that you really dig?
That's a real interesting question. I'm one of those people who, I guess because the game is personal to me through, my grandfather and my great-grandfather was Judy Johnson in a Negro League. So the game was always been personal. I did not know that. Your great-grandfather, then, Judy Johnson, was a big name in the Negro Leagues. You didn't know that? Well, that's actually how my grandfather, Billy Bruton, that's how he started playing baseball. He was he went off to World War II and then came back and settled in Wilmington, Delaware. And at the time, Judy Johnson had retired. He was in Delaware, but he was working as, scouting manager for the Philadelphia Phillies. And he met my grandmother, and they started dating. And she said, "You got to come see this guy play. He's a good player." And he went and saw him play, and that kind of started it off. But the Philadelphia Phillies already had a black player, and most players at the time most teams at the time didn't want more than one, black player on the team. So Judy scouted him to Milwaukee, and that's how he got that contract.
Whoa!
Yeah, and so that was one of the other reasons why when it came to some of the racial barriers, my grandfather had it a little better than some of the other players, was because Judy really taught him how to, network and communicate within the northern world. He was from Alabama, so that he's now in the north and now, in helping integrating baseball. He taught him how to survive and how to talk and, speak the right way and things like that. And, same with Hank Aaron and Covington, too. You find they credited my grandfather with passing along the things that Judy taught him.
Whoa. Oh, that is a tremendous story. That really fits right into what I'm trying to achieve. Absolutely great. He picked, Judy Johnson did, a team, Philadelphia, that the Phillies were so far behind in racial integration.
Yeah.
I remember there was the fellow that gave Jackie Robinson, oh my God, the hardest time was the manager of the Phillies, a guy named Sawyer. And Philadelphia and St. Louis were both known as cities that were very difficult. For your great-grandfather to get a job with Philadelphia in scouting and what have you, that in itself was an advancement. Did he?
Yeah, it was.
Did you hear stories about that?
I don't know if he was the first, but he may have been. I know he was one of the first to serve in that position, and I know he didn't have a lot of training with Jackie Robinson, but they did have a lot of interaction and things of how you survive in this world that they didn't know about. A lot of these black players were coming from the South, so this was completely uncharted territory for them, So those Negro League players that were still around and had traveled and up in the North a lot, they taught them a lot.
Okay, everybody knows. I mean, it's legend. People know that the trials and tribulations that Jackie faced, being the first black to play in the big league sports. But what people don't know is that the second wave of blacks, Frank Robinson, Beta Pinson, your dad, Henry Aaron, and all that, they were faced with almost insurmountable problems, given that Jackie's first year in organized ball, he played in Montreal, which was a very, very liberal city. And they accepted him. It didn't matter that he was black. And then he came to Brooklyn. And Brooklyn loved him and accepted him. But the second wave of players, when they came up in the minors, all the minors were in these deep South redneck places.
Yeah.
And they faced almost as much of a hard time as Jackie did. Jackie paved the way, but it wasn't by any means easy for your dad. Can your dad?
No, not at all.
Or your granddad? Did he pass on any stories about integration and what it was like? I remember that Henry Aaron was at Eau Claire, and I think your dad was there at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was known as kind of a rough place. Did he pass on any stories about the low minor leagues and what he had to go through just as a human?
He didn't talk about his minor league time much, but he did talk about that integration period when he was starting, and it went on actually throughout his entire career. Most of the time they didn't travel on the same bus with the rest of the team. Their training camp was in Florida, and the first year or two, my grandmother went with them, but after that, she said, "No, I don't want to go." They weren't allowed to stay at the hotels. They had to find a black family that had enough room and would take them in. And, so that was pretty much everywhere they traveled when they were, on the road. Because they couldn't stay at the hotels were all white. This was still pre-civil rights, you know what I mean? So it was worse, when you got down to the South, of course, but even in the North, it was, it wasn't much better. It was a little easier to handle, but it wasn't much better in the fact that you're still separated from your team the majority of the time.
I know he faced embittered experiences
Yeah.
How did he keep from being embittered himself?
His motto was he just wanted to play baseball. He loved the game. It was about the game for them. And with a lot of the players, I mean, he did say there were some players he didn't really go into name and mention a lot of detail because he left a lot of that at home, you know, whether it was baseball or when he was at Chrysler. When he came home, he was dad, he was grandpa. He didn't talk about, you know what I mean, his experiences as much. But, you know, he did say some players when they first were starting, they were really hard on him and, you know, on all the different players actually. But over time, it just got better because they just, hey, it just wasn't about black or white. We just wanted to play baseball. We became a team.
And winning was more important than all of that was going on.
Than the race, right, exactly.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to talk to you about was Dave Bing.
Okay.
Because you mentioned your dad was going to play for the Pistons, and Dave Bing was an incredibly successful, not only on the court, he was from Syracuse, where there's a lot of racism up in Syracuse as well. But business-wise, Dave Bing was tremendously successful as a businessman as well. Did their paths cross in Detroit at all? And did your dad get to know him?
I don't know if him and my grandfather's paths crossed at all. That would be interesting. You would think that it would, but I didn't hear of any stories on that end.
Okay.
My dad met him on a couple of occasions, but it was more so in the sports arena and things like that. And you know, I was so young that I didn't know much about Dave Bing until he started getting into politics.
Oh, okay. That's right. He did. He was a mayor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was a mayor of Detroit for a while. So that's how I knew. I knew of his career, but I knew of him more because of his political side.
Okay. Speaking of mayors and basketball, the mayor of Sacramento, I can't think of his first name now, was a basketball player named Johnson. Do you know who I'm talking about? He was a terrific basketball player at Cal. What folks don't realize about Johnson was that he played minor league baseball with the A's a little bit between high school and going to Cal, and was a shortstop and a prospect in baseball too. So, and he ended up as the mayor of Sacramento. He owned the Sacramento Kings. So
I think my uncle may have known him. That name sounds familiar. And my grandfather's brother, as I said, when they were young, they all played together with their dad. But my grandfather's younger brother was Napoleon. We called him Nip. And Nip, he was a very good baseball player, but he couldn't go pro. But he played in the minor leagues up and down California and then played in a Canadian league. I'm not sure if that was pro or minor, but he played in Canada. And I want to say we know that name through him.
Okay, I think it's Charles Johnson. No, Charles Johnson was on the Warriors years ago. It wasn't Charles Johnson, but for some reason I blank. But what can I tell you? Like I say, you get old, you blank on certain things. But I think I kept up with. I learned. This was nice for me. I learned Judy Johnson was your dad's, your grandfather's father. He was your great-grandfather.
No, father-in-law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My grandfather married Judy's daughter.
Okay. I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
So, wow. What's your grandmother still alive?
She passed in 2012. Not
Okay.
2016, actually.
Sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that. I'm thinking back. This has been a terrific show. This has really been nice for me. I'm glad I got to bring up some memories for you, and you certainly did for me. Being 12, and the reason I decided I picked that age, a kid is innocent at 12. There's a certain amount of innocence, but at 12, you have a certain amount of knowledge about the world.
Yeah.
And I think the combination of innocence and knowledge, when you look back on your memories, it's not just, the grass was green, that type of thing. You remember things in a way that you couldn't when you were a kid, and when you're a little older, those memories become ingrained in other things. In other words, it's not just the simplicity of picking up a baseball and throwing it.
I agree. I agree with that. You still have 12. You still have your youth and innocence about life and how you see things. You're not as jaded in your vision. You know what I mean? You're still. You know what I mean?
Right. Looking back, how did you feel looking back at your memories? Do you think there was one thing that represents your innocence of those days, where you later on you went, "Whoa, how could have I misjudged that?"
Honestly, I think it was baseball. I get together with my first cousin, who we played together. We're the same age. We're actually only a month apart. And one of the things we see each other and we say every time is, why did we stop playing? We don't know the answer. I still don't know the answer to why I stopped playing. And that was kind of like one of our most joyous and favorite things to do was get together and play baseball. And we look at each other now like, I mean, it's in our blood. We could have been pro ourselves at this point, So I think that's probably my biggest regret is not continuing playing.
What do you use in the real estate business that you learned from sports?
Interesting, that I learned from sports. My competitive drive in business probably started with me in sports. I'm very competitive and more so about performance. You know what I mean? I like to be the better performer on the team in business. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that started with sports.
Beautiful. William, will you come back someday?
Absolutely. You know exactly how to reach me anytime. And if you want to talk to my dad, we can arrange that sometime as well. My aunt, his baby sister is also alive, so we can do that anytime.
I'd be thrilled. And I want to say I'm glowing. This is, if you only knew how those memories of your dad and Henry and those guys stand out in my mind. Wow. Thanks for a great podcast, William.
No problem.
Okay. When I play simulation ball, where I have this little computer league where the old teams play each other, and I'll give you a little plug for the company that the game that I use is called Baseball Mogul. And if you just look that up on the internet, I'll send you a link to it. You can plug in all the old teams and all the players and set up who batting orders against lefties, against righties, and this, that, and the other thing. And when I play those Braves, it's just like being 12. Like I say, and you know how I don't announce the game per se, but when Billy Bruton comes up, I've always called him Billy Bruton. That was my introduction. Leading off, number 38, Billy Bruton. Number 38.
Wow, that's
and
crazy.
William had a second, and Matthews, and then Aaron, and Covington came after him, and it's just these are great memories. Thank you so much, William.
Anytime. I had a good time.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I know folks out there listening got just as much of a kick out of it as we did doing it. So I'm going to just say, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all, and my guest was the fabulous William Bruton. How's that?
Perfect.
All right. Say hi to your dad for me. Thank him for setting all this up, and we'll get the three of us on together next time.
All right. That sounds like a plan.
Beautiful. Stay healthy, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. You stay safe. All right.
Happy trails, everybody. Thanks for listening. Adios.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.